views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. In the dialogue about development, about success in schools, about productivity in the workplace and the accessibility of good jobs, in addition to the nagging issues of overcrowded streets and roads, standstill traffic, overcrowded, inefficient, and delayed subways, sounds like just about everything involved with living in New York and the Bronx, are large questions about our transit systems, both below and above the ground. Tonight we'll talk about whether numbers of fare-beating arrests are targeting some New Yorkers, whether the cost of public transit can be addressed despite woeful budget numbers, and also the larger question of whether a congestion pricing plan is a good answer for some of these issues. It's a complex problem, and we have a lot to figure out tonight, but we have two great experts with us from the Community Service Society of New York, the senior economist and author of reports on fare evasion arrests and the cost of transit. It is Harold Stolper, and an associate professor from the Hunter College Department of Urban Policy and Planning, Professor William Milczarski. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Mr. Stolper, let's start with you. This whole idea of fare evasion, it's against the law. People should not be doing it. If they do it, I guess you could extrapolate to the next step. They're costing all of us money because it's a fare that we're not collecting on. But your contention in the study you did said that a disproportionate number of people of color are getting arrested. Explain what we're talking about.
Sure. Well, first, I think it's important to start to think about what fare evasion arrests really represent. And they represent arrests for crimes of poverty, right? You are breaking the law, generally speaking, out of desperation, right? People living paycheck to paycheck, they have to make tough choices, right? If you have to get to a job interview, you have to get to work, sometimes out of desperation. What do? You say, I got no choice, I got to jump the turnstile, right? Then,
can I just interject with that? Do we know that conclusively, that it's not just other people who have larger disregards for the law and standards and you know, kind of living and working in a society that people say, you know what, I don't really give a damn about the transit or you or your public or the cost, and it's not a matter of saving the $275. It's more a matter of I don't care. I'm just
right.
It's not the way I look at the world.
I think at this point the consequences are well known enough that no one's doing this for fun. You know, there might be a few kids here and there, but this is something which, you know, people are being arrested in large numbers. Communities that are being targeted that we'll talk about in a second, you know, there's a police presence, they know this is happening. This isn't something that people are doing for fun. I mean, you can imagine how fun is it to jump a turnstile when you know you might get arrested or have to pay a large fine, right? This isn't what's driving it, right? So do we have poll numbers on that? No, but I don't think anyone really thinks that large numbers of people are doing this as a recreational exercise, right? The odd younger person, sure, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who have a hard choice. My paycheck hasn't come this week. What do I use it for? Rent, food. If I use it up for that, what do? I got to get to work. Okay, so you make this hard choice, and what happens when you make this hard choice? So there is a police presence, which through our analysis, we've shown to this presence is disproportionately targeting, it's not something that is driven by poverty or crime. If you compare two neighborhoods, two station areas, let's say subway station areas, one with similar poverty rates, similar rates of criminal activity, one is predominantly black and one is not. The predominantly black poor station has much higher fare evasion arrest rates than the non-black station area.
Is your contention that that's where they're putting the police officers, or is your contention that, you know what, let's let those guys go, and these, you know, that there's a real intent there, which of course, I guess both contentions would be significant. That would be really significant because that would imply an inherent racism.
Right. So that's a great question. So we don't have the data yet to look at intent. But if you think about what's driving fare evasion, it's economic need, poverty, right? Or it could be broken windows policing, which has sort of characterized police practices in New York City for years now, which does place police officers in areas where the idea is, you know, we're looking for serious criminals, but we're going to catch low-level criminals, petty offenses, quality of life offenses, things like that, right? And so we can't say all of the reasons why police are arresting people in higher rates at these stations, but if there's similar rates of poverty, similar rates of crime in the nearby area, right? And what we're seeing is much higher arrest rates at the black stations than a Hispanic or white station with similar crime and similar poverty. What could be driving it? I would list 4 possibilities. One is it's the consequence of broken windows policing, right? Other possibilities are whether it's explicit or implicit racial bias, because there is some discretion on the part of police, right? That's something which the NYPD has admitted to us.
So just on that point, so potentially that suggests that if a white person, you know, jumped over the turnstile or went backwards through the outdoor and got into a subway, that a police officer would turn their back?
Oh, well, we can't say that for sure. No, absolutely. They may or may not be doing that. What we know is the net effect in these communities is that many more people are being arrested in predominantly black poor neighborhoods than predominantly Hispanic or predominantly white poor neighborhoods, right? And all of the internal practices that the NYPD are doing to lead us to that result, right? That's sort of a black box.
I interrupted you. You were up to number 2, so let's get to 3 and 4.
Oh, I think I was 2 and 3. Number 4 is quotas. Okay. Number 4 is a quota system, right? Which some police officers come out and said that, you know, there is pressure to reach certain arrest rates, and when that happens, these are easy targets, right? If you go to a poor station, in a subway station in a poor area, right, it's pretty easy to catch someone desperate enough if you wait long enough and hide behind poles, which is what people are doing.
There was the suggestion police officers have leaked recordings of their supervisors berating them for not issuing enough, you're familiar with this because it came out of your report, for not issuing enough fare evasion summonses to young male blacks, and other officers have sued to stop them from doing that. How prevalent is that? That again taps into what I was saying would be the most serious of offenses.
So that's alarming. We can't say, you know, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors of the NYPD. What we do know is that, well, one thing that will help shed a little bit more information on that is, first, the contention that people are not arresting enough of a certain type of people. Look at the demographics of who's being arrested. I think it's, if you look in Brooklyn, black males represent 1/3 of the adult black males represent 1/3 of the population in poverty, but 2/3 of arrests, right? So to deny that there's some overrepresentation, that's a fact. They're overrepresented among arrests compared to poverty. Whether it's driven by quotas or not, we can't say, but this recent legislation, I don't know, which I'm sure we'll get to, by the city council just passed this legislation.
The Right to Know Act.
Well, I'm thinking specifically about Councilman Lantzman's legislation in the heels of our report, which required the NYPD to release arrest figures by stations citywide.
Right.
And so that will help us to sort of push this analysis forward.
And figure out at least a little further down the line. I'm interested in this idea of broken windows policing. Now, Mayor de Blasio has presented himself as the anti-stop and frisk guy, and in fact, he, I believe, has the low crime numbers now at the end of 2017 to show, guess what? We did it. People who said it was going to cause an immense spike in crime were actually wrong, because this notion of community policing, handling communities and relationships with people in neighborhoods in a different way, has actually helped lower crime as we predicted it would. Yet the mayor has not come down, or at least supported your contentions when it comes to, this notion of potentially targeting people in fair beating arrests. Conflict? I mean, how do you resolve that?
Absolutely
And
troubling conflict.
what do you think that's about?
Well, I can't say what's in the mayor's heart, but the whole idea of making New York the fairest city, claiming I want to make New York City the fairest city in America, and reducing inequality, and really trying to move these two separate cities to one. Well, to do that, we have to understand what's driving people apart, right? And think about the different barriers to opportunity, to upward mobility. And one of the most obvious barriers is mobility, physical mobility, getting around, right? And the basic understanding that people who are evading the fare, in almost all cases, are not doing it for fun, but we're doing it because they don't have the means to get to work, to get to school.
This was your contention at the beginning, yeah.
Right. And he seems, despite listing transit affordability as a priority, not understanding the root of the problem and what it drives people to do out of desperation. And that's what's troubling. We're not saying fare evasion shouldn't, we should just let everybody walk through the turnstiles, but we have to think about why are people doing it and devoting more resources so they don't need to do that.
Figuring it out. And I should mention, this is the report, the crime, that's their report, the crime of being short 275 police in communities of color at the turnstile. So that was the report that Community Service Society of New York and Mr. Stolper put out. Let's talk about the cost of fares. Now, you have come out, and I'd be curious to get Professor Milczarski in on the dialogue. You've come out to say, you know what, 275 is too much for many of these New Yorkers. We ought to simply give them either free Metro cards. I remember when I was a kid, we had you used to get a bus pass and you could ride on the bus for free. You're saying there should be more of that, lower that for low-income New Yorkers, and I guess that would mean when you, much like if you get a food stamp card or something like that, when you buy your Metro card, there's some consideration for who you are and the amount of money, almost like a prorated system of some sort. That's what you support.
Yeah, I think it could be done much more simply in that, right, as you say, when you go to get certified for food stamp eligibility, they check your income, you get a card, and you use that to purchase groceries down the road. Same thing could work in here. You go to HRA or some city agency which is already in the business of doing this, nothing new, right? And they say, hey, you also qualify for a half-price Metro card.
But of course, then you get into the whole budget question. I'm going to bring in Professor Milczarski on this. Transit system has no money. You can open up any local newspaper and you could see about the debate for how to deal with this. Would doing something like that hurt the transit system? He doesn't want to admit, but he was stuck on the train this morning and make the problems in our subways, which are immense, even worse.
I think one of the things we're both trained to do as policy analysts is think in terms of cost and benefits. Surely this program will not be free, but when you think of the benefits to society, people being able to get to job interviews, people being able to get a job, people being able to hold a job because they're not absent from work all the time because they can afford to get there, the benefits might be truly worth the cost. I don't know the cost figure. I did read it, but I forget it. But it seems to me to be a drop in the bucket given the societal benefits that could accrue from a program like this. Mm-hmm. Other cities have attempted it, have tried it. It seems to be working well. I think New York can take the lead here and jump in on a program like this, truly.
Do you think, now you've suggested it, and certainly Mr. Stolper believes it, do you think that it, and I actually alluded to it at the opening, that there is a loss of productivity as a result of $2.75?
There's no doubt about this.
There's no doubt about it. You think that people don't go to work?
People can't get to work because they don't have the means to get to work. When you're spending 10 to 12 to 15% of your household budget on transportation, something's got to give. Do you not pay the rent that month? Do you not have breakfast for your kids that month? Something has to give.
Or do you jump the turnstile?
Or do you jump the turnstile? Yeah.
It's funny how it all links up, isn't it? Well, it's going to link up then with our next subject, and that is the idea of congestion pricing. Now, CSS has come out for it. And I'll read to you what there was some speculation the governor was going to talk about it in the State of State. He said his Fix New York panel, which it would seem to be is a kind of a code word for study in congestion pricing, will shortly present a report that will have several options for the legislature to consider. We will have new technology installed which will offer a variety of alternatives, defining an exclusive zone in Manhattan where additional charges could be paid. This is congestion pricing, is what he didn't want to use the word because it's another code word. Do you think this is a good idea? And that would be potentially drawing some sort of boundary around sections of Manhattan and saying anybody who crosses that boundary will have to pay. You think it's a good idea?
I think most transportation experts, most economists, most policy analysts think in large metropolitan areas it's an idea whose time has come. It's called congestion pricing for a reason. It's supposed to reduce congestion. Anybody who goes to Midtown knows it's almost in a state of perpetual gridlock. The New York Metropolitan Transportation Council tells us that on a typical business day, and this statistic, when I quote it, often astounds people, 4 million people enter Manhattan's core below 60th Street on a typical business day. Almost 1 million vehicles enter the core on a typical business day. At its cumulative peak, there are 2 million people and almost 500,000 vehicles in Midtown. Plus we have more bicyclists and we have more pedestrians, and so we have this situation where it's almost perpetual gridlock. Congestion pricing, in addition to having other benefits, which we can probably get into, its main benefit is to reduce congestion, which reduces pollution, reduces fuel consumption, reduces accidents. It's a good thing.
Do you think that the people will get out of their cars and then do what? And then jump in the subway? I joked with somebody in preparation for the show, and we were talking about the possibilities. I said, boy, if I'm a real estate person, I'm buying a parking garage on 96th Street because everybody's going to come down and zip into that garage and jump on the train. Is that the process that we're looking to create here? Because people are not going to stop coming into Manhattan, but they will, they're going to look for an alternative because the number I heard was something like $8 to get into Manhattan. Of course, that's speculation, and that's just me chatting with people, but that's where we're at.
Well, other cities have made it work. In London, I checked this morning, it's 11.5 pounds, which converts to about $15.5 to enter the core of London.
In a vehicle.
In a vehicle.
Right.
And it's in effect all day from morning to evening on a weekday. And London has made it work, Singapore has made it work, Stockholm has made it work. New Yorkers there'll be some short-term dislocations. People will have to get used to it. But we're a resilient sort in New York, and I think we can make it work here.
Before I let you in here, I talked with somebody who lives in the Northwest Bronx about it, and somebody who's involved in both in government and in policy. And he said, well, people who live up here have to pay the toll at the Henry Hudson Bridge when they go down the west side to go into Manhattan. And then if in fact what we hear is true, and this is all speculation, I will acknowledge that, then as they go down the ramp on the West Side Highway, if they're going to do business in Manhattan, maybe do governmental business or whatever it is, they're going to go and then pay another $8. They're paying twice. And is that fair, ironic term to use, is that fair for those people? And then I know he has something to say to this.
Well, the governor is being very vague at this point, isn't he? The devil is in the details.
We know what he's doing, yes.
There is some speculation that if you already pay a toll, that will count against the congestion charge. So in other words, if you're paying on the Henry Hudson Parkway, that would count against your congestion charge. And you
that's
wouldn't pay
interesting.
People who use the Verrazano, for example, might not have to pay the full charge. And so we'll have to see how the details come out on this to see whether or not, but I don't think there will be a double charge.
And you think its time has come? I mean,
absolutely.
And there's no reason
CSS certainly believes it.
No.
Right. That's
Say it
the
again?
point. There's no reason there needs to be a double charge, right? Congestion pricing should be designed in a way to get people to pay for the costs they impose on the system and on other riders. And part of that is, levying a charge on the most congested area, the central business district. Another part of that is harmonizing the crossings, the East River crossings, right? You have some free, some overpriced, some underpriced, right? And we don't know any details from the governor, but that should be a big part of the goal, right, of congestion pricing. It's about getting people to pay the costs they impose, which includes building the roads, maintaining the roads, right? Congestion, time costs, air pollution, all these things. So.
The contention, I did speak to a lot of people before this, and contention of people in the southern part of the Bronx, in the central Bronx, they say, look, we're not driving into Manhattan anyway. That was their contention, and so, you know, let's do it. Where should that money go? Does that money go directly to help pay for mass transit? Is that what? Because certainly there are transportation advocates who say, you know, they said that's what was going to happen to toll bridges, and that money is not really earmarked directly anyway. Right. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think it should be a combination. I think, you know, this whole pay for the cost that you impose includes, you know, you're imposing costs on the building the infrastructure and maintaining the infrastructure. So some of it should go to roads, maintaining them and building them. But a large portion of it should go and can go to public transit, because that is a more sustainable way of helping New York City residents get around at the scale they need to do going forward.
Yeah, getting back to the devil being in the details.
Yes, we're acknowledging
I
that.
think we have to almost insist that a large percentage of the revenue generated by congestion pricing has to go to providing alternatives to using the roads. And that means improving a rapidly deteriorating transit system. So there's no doubt in my mind that a large amount of that revenue should go to mass transit.
Yeah, the majority.
One point to contend, I think you brought it up, Professor, that all transportation organizations are behind it. I checked with the AAA prior to the show, and they are definitively against it. And in fact, prior to the show, sent me some numbers, said that, you know, the idea here is that, in essence, poor people, people with lower incomes, are not driving their cars. They claim that under $50,000 a year, 53.8% of those people do drive into Manhattan based on their numbers. And then if you go lower, under $30,000 a year, they say that 24.6, almost 25%. And these are Bronx numbers, by the way. I do have the citywide numbers, but of course we're always focused on 24.6% under $30,000 a year are in fact driving into Manhattan, which is 25,000 workers. That would be a regressive tax for them. You want to go first, and then
that was always many people's fear about congestion pricing, that it would be like a regressive tax. I'm not sure where AAA got their numbers from, but I have to point to my friend here on the right to say that the Community Service Society has done some path-breaking research to show that congestion pricing in New York would not be regressive. Very few poor people drive into Manhattan's core.
So are you disputing these numbers? You're saying that 25% is not significant enough to change the
I'm saying we
policy?
have two conflicting, I thought the Community Service Society's
Yeah,
numbers said it was
I'd
something
be
like
happy.
1.8% or something like that.
I'd be happy to review their numbers after, but the numbers we use are pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of gray area here, right? Of outer borough residents, and the numbers I have at the top of my head are not just for the Bronx, but for all outer borough residents, only 4% drive in to Manhattan for their daily commutes. Only 4%.
Okay, which would conflict with this, because they claim the New York City total is at 24% under $30,000.
And I'd be happy to review that later. But only 4%, and of that 4%, only another 4% are below the poverty line. So we're talking about a minuscule number of working poor who are commuting by car, which, quite frankly, I would say is common sense, right? This is a transit-dependent city. Harder for some people than others that do have cars, but you know, to own a car in New York City, to pay to park it and to keep it when you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's not something which most working poor residents are doing. Some are further out, but so to say that it's regressive on balance is not, in my opinion, a sensible claim.
Yeah,
if you compare the few working poor that do drive in, who have to pay the same toll that wealthier drivers do, in that sense, there's that violates the principle of, to use some jargon, horizontal equity, right? They're not being, equally. They're Yeah, what it is it's a larger burden on the lower income person than the higher income person. But there's ways to deal with that, right?
You know, I just want to go back to our policy guy. Among the other suggestions, which potentially, whether the governor said it or others have talked about, tolls on the East River bridges. This could all be connected with a whole new look at, you know, the cost of getting cars into Manhattan. People are saying deliveries only at nighttime, limit deliveries, adding bus lanes, so that, and this would go back to what you were saying, let's find new ways of getting people to move around the city. And then, you know, my contention in the Bronx, because we've had such a problem with trucks in our neighborhoods, is specific zones for deliveries so that trucks can't go on certain streets. What are your thoughts about any of those? I just threw it all out there at once.
I'll go back to my original thought, which is that we're getting to, you know, the old movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still? Everything. Okay, well, this is, this is what Manhattan is turning into, a place where traffic is at a standstill. And if we don't figure out ways to talk about productivity, what a productivity loss. When deliveries can't be made, the FedEx guy can't get through, the beer truck can't get to the bars.
Or my guest can't get to his show. That becomes, for me, that's a major issue.
So we have to wrap our hands around this congestion issue.
Out of all the things you heard today, we're going to give you the last word. What's the one thing you'd like to see happen to address transit inequities and all the
Can I
these
cheat and
things?
just follow quickly and say that the whole point of congestion pricing is to get people to change their behavior, right? And that's something which people don't want to do. But when people are behaving in a way where they're used to, and they have to pay more, that's uncomfortable, but sometimes it's the right thing to do.
I'm going to conclude with another number that you won't dispute, because I also got it from the AAA. In the last 5 years, we've added 125,000 cars in New York City. That is a lot of cars.
That's a lot of cars.
Without significant road and you know, infrastructure expansion. Harold Stolper from Community Service Society, thank you so much. From Hunter College, Professor Milczarski, thank you.
It was a pleasure.
And folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, send us an email at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can tweet us at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page. We'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can check out our archives at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk by following the watch menu on the new BronxNet website, which looks so spectacular. Next week, a Bronxite has a new book out about achieving in the face of diversity. He's an incredibly engaging and inspiring personality, and I think it will motivate all of us to do better in 2018, so we'll see you then. Oh, thank you to our new producer, Helen Greenberg, who's already doing a great job, and our regular director, William Guzman. See you next week. Good night.